4th of July, Independence Day, the declaration that became a nation. This is an audio story written by Cardinal, the illumination of a dynamic archive. Some moments in history arrive quietly, appearing at first to be little more than discussions recorded on paper, debated in rooms, and carried across distances by ink and voice. Yet certain decisions possess a weight that only becomes visible as time unfolds. The moment preserved in this record belongs to such a decision. It began not with fireworks or celebration, but with deliberation among representatives who gathered to consider a question that had been forming slowly across years of uncertainty. Their circumstances were shaped by distance, by the practical realities of governing communities across an ocean, and by the evolving understanding that people living in one place often come to see their future differently from those who rule them from another. The story that follows does not begin with a finished nation or a settled tradition. It begins with a conversation about authority, responsibility, and the possibility that a society might choose to determine its own course. The written declaration that emerged from those conversations would eventually become one of the most recognized documents in the world, but at the time it was simply a statement prepared to explain a difficult decision. Over the centuries that followed, the meaning of that document expanded beyond its original purpose. What began as a declaration addressed to governments became a symbol remembered by communities, families, and generations who continued to gather each year beneath the summer sky. This record observes how that moment moved from parchment to memory, from decision to tradition, and how a document created during a time of uncertainty gradually became associated with a day of celebration recognized across an entire nation. Long before the day now known as the 4th of July became a national observance, the lands along the eastern edge of North America were home to growing communities shaped by the rhythms of settlement, trade, and daily work. These communities had developed over generations, guided by familiar traditions yet gradually influenced by the realities of distance from the governments that claimed authority over them. Messages traveled across the Atlantic slowly, and the lives of those living in the colonies were often governed as much by local circumstances as by decisions made in distant halls of power. Within this environment, questions about representation, authority, and responsibility began to circulate through assemblies, pamphlets, and private discussions. What had once been seen as ordinary disagreements within an empire gradually took on deeper meaning as colonists reflected on their own experiences of governance and community life. By the middle of the 18th century, the colonies had begun to see themselves not only as extensions of a distant nation but as societies capable of shaping their own direction. When conflict eventually emerged between the colonies and the British government, it unfolded against this backdrop of evolving identity and political thought. The declaration that would later be adopted in Philadelphia did not appear suddenly. It emerged from years of conversation about how people should be governed and who should possess the authority to make those decisions. The pages that follow trace how that declaration came to be written, how it spread among the people who heard it read aloud, and how, over time, the memory of that moment became woven into the traditions that return each summer with the arrival of the 4th of July. In the summer of 1776, the city of Philadelphia stood at the center of a question that would reshape the course of history. Inside the Pennsylvania State House, delegates representing 13 British colonies gathered to consider whether their future would remain tied to the authority of the British Crown or move toward an uncertain path of self-government. For years tensions had been building across the colonies, carried through town meetings, newspapers, and private correspondence. The issue before the Continental Congress was no longer merely political disagreement. It had become a question of identity and direction. The delegates knew that the decision they were about to consider would not only determine the fate of their colonies but would also echo far beyond their own time. The divide between the colonies and Great Britain had not appeared suddenly. It had developed gradually through a series of disagreements over taxation, governance, and the authority of Parliament. Colonists argued that laws and taxes imposed from across the Atlantic lacked the consent of the people who would live under them. British leaders, on the other hand, believed they were maintaining the structure of an empire that stretched across continents. What began as disputes over policy slowly hardened into a deeper conflict about representation, autonomy, and the nature of political authority itself. By the middle of the 18th century, many colonists were beginning to wonder whether the distance between their lives and the decisions of distant rulers had become too great to reconcile. The story of this moment stretched back more than a century before the debates of 1776. In 1607, English settlers established Jamestown, the first permanent English colony in North America. Over the decades that followed, additional colonies formed along the eastern seaboard, each developing its own communities, economies, and local traditions. Though governed under British rule, these settlements gradually formed societies shaped by the landscapes and conditions of a new continent. Trade routes expanded, towns grew, and local assemblies began to manage many everyday affairs. Across generations, colonists learned to organize their communities with increasing independence, creating habits of local governance that would later influence their thinking about political authority. By the mid-1700s, the people living in the colonies had begun to see themselves as something more than distant subjects of the British Crown. While they shared language, cultural traditions, and economic ties with Britain, their daily lives were shaped by the realities of the American continent. Communities built their own institutions, elected local representatives, and managed regional concerns that rarely reached the attention of Parliament. As trade expanded and ideas circulated through pamphlets and public debates, a growing sense of shared identity began to form among the colonies. This emerging awareness did not immediately demand independence, but it did encourage colonists to think more carefully about their place within the empire and the degree of autonomy they believed they deserved. On June 7, 1776, the question of independence moved from discussion to formal proposal. Richard Henry Lee of Virginia introduced a resolution before the Continental Congress declaring that the colonies were, and of right ought to be, free and independent states. The proposal did not immediately end debate. Instead, it opened a period of intense discussion among the delegates. Some believed independence had become unavoidable, while others worried about the consequences of breaking from a powerful empire. War had already begun the year before, and the stakes were unmistakably high. The resolution forced the Congress to confront a decision that would either preserve the colonial relationship or permanently transform it. Delegates continued their discussions with careful attention to the risks involved. Independence would mean confronting the British Empire not only with words but with the reality of continued conflict. The colonies lacked the resources and military strength of the empire they challenged, and the outcome of the war was far from certain. Yet many delegates believed that the path toward independence had already begun. Events in the colonies had created a momentum that was difficult to reverse. As arguments were exchanged and alliances formed among the delegates, the Continental Congress gradually moved toward a decision that would reshape the political map of the Atlantic world. On July 2, 1776, the Continental Congress voted in favor of the resolution for independence. For the delegates present in Philadelphia, the vote marked a decisive turning point. The colonies had formally chosen to separate themselves from British authority and to pursue their own path as independent states. Yet the decision required more than a vote. It needed a written declaration explaining the reasoning behind the separation and presenting the colonies' position to the wider world. With independence now approved, attention turned toward completing a document that would express the principles behind the decision. To prepare the document, Congress appointed a committee of 5 delegates: Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, Roger Sherman, and Robert R. Livingston. Jefferson took the lead in drafting the text, drawing upon ideas that had circulated widely in political writings of the time. The document explained the colonies' belief that governments derive their authority from the consent of the governed and that people possess certain rights that cannot easily be taken away. While these ideas were not new, the declaration gathered them into a clear statement explaining why the colonies believed separation from Great Britain had become necessary. On July 4, 1776, the Continental Congress adopted the final wording of the Declaration of Independence. The document transformed the vote for independence into a public proclamation addressed not only to Britain but to nations across the world. Its language declared that the colonies were no longer under British authority and would instead exist as free and independent states. Though the war for independence was still unfolding, the declaration provided a clear explanation of the colonies' intentions and principles. It marked the moment when the decision for independence moved from private debate into public record. In the weeks that followed, the delegates began signing the document that carried such historic significance. Among the signatures, one stood out prominently. John Hancock, serving as president of the Continental Congress, signed his name boldly near the top of the parchment. Over time, his signature became the most recognizable on the document, and his name eventually entered everyday language as a synonym for a personal signature. The act of signing represented more than a formality. It signaled a personal commitment by each delegate to the cause of independence and the principles stated in the Declaration. Once the Declaration had been adopted, copies of the document were printed and distributed across the colonies. Newspapers published the text, town officials organized public readings, and citizens gathered to hear the words that had been approved in Philadelphia. These readings allowed the Declaration to move beyond the halls of Congress and into the public life of the colonies. In towns and villages throughout the region, people listened as the words describing independence were spoken aloud. Through these gatherings, the document began to take on a broader cultural meaning, connecting communities to the decision that had been made. Although the Declaration had announced independence, the Revolutionary War continued. Military campaigns, alliances, and years of struggle lay ahead before the independence described in the document would be fully secured. The colonies faced challenges on multiple fronts, from organizing armies to maintaining supplies and diplomatic support. Yet the Declaration had already changed the nature of the conflict. What had begun as a colonial rebellion had now become a war fought in the name of an emerging nation determined to define its own future. The war finally reached its conclusion in 1783 when the Treaty of Paris formally recognized the United States as an independent nation. The treaty marked the end of years of conflict and confirmed the political reality that had first been declared in 1776. With recognition from Britain, the former colonies entered a new phase of history as a sovereign country. The decision made in Philadelphia several years earlier had now become an internationally acknowledged fact, opening the door for the young nation to shape its own institutions and policies. In the years that followed, the United States began building the structures of a new republic. Leaders debated the design of government, the balance of authority between states and the federal system, and the principles that would guide the nation's future. While these discussions sometimes produced disagreements, they also demonstrated the determination to create a government based on representative institutions. The ideas expressed in the Declaration continued to influence these debates, reminding citizens that the nation had been founded upon a commitment to self-government. Even during the early years of the Republic, people began marking the anniversary of independence with public celebrations. In 1777, communities organized the first commemorations of the Declaration's adoption. Bells rang, gatherings were held, and citizens came together to acknowledge the significance of the event. These early celebrations were modest compared with those of later generations, but they established a pattern that would grow over time. Each anniversary offered an opportunity for communities to remember the moment when independence had first been declared. Among the most memorable elements of these early celebrations were fireworks displays and citywide illuminations. In Philadelphia, accounts described a grand exhibition of fireworks that filled the night sky with bursts of light. Such displays symbolized both celebration and remembrance, linking the excitement of the moment with the ideals expressed in the Declaration. Over time, fireworks became closely associated with Independence Day, transforming the anniversary into a visual reminder of the nation's founding moment. As the decades passed, Independence Day celebrations expanded across towns and cities throughout the country. Public readings of the Declaration, parades through city streets, and speeches by civic leaders became common features of the holiday. communities gathered in public spaces to mark the anniversary together, reinforcing the sense that the nation's founding belonged to all who lived within it. Through repeated observance, the day became more than a historical reminder, it evolved into a shared civic tradition. Independence Day gradually took its place as one of the most widely observed civic holidays in the United States. The day provided an opportunity for communities to reflect on the origins of the nation while also celebrating the freedoms and institutions that had developed over time. Families gathered, flags were displayed, and public events brought people together in recognition of the country's founding principles. Through these annual gatherings, the memory of the Declaration continued to pass from one generation to the next. In 1870, the United States Congress formally recognized July 4th as a federal holiday. The decision acknowledged the importance the day had already gained within American society. By the late 19th century, Independence Day had become a regular fixture of civic life, celebrated across the country with parades, ceremonies, and community gatherings. The official recognition by Congress simply confirmed what citizens had long understood. The anniversary of the Declaration held a central place in the nation's historical memory. Several decades later, in 1941, Independence Day was established as a paid federal holiday for workers. This step ensured that many Americans could participate more easily in the celebrations that have become part of national life. The change reflected the continuing importance of the holiday as both a civic observance and a moment for families and communities to gather. By the mid-20th century, the 4th of July had firmly established itself as a day when the country paused to remember its beginnings. As the nation approaches the year 2026, attention has begun to turn toward the upcoming 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. Across states and communities, preparations for commemorations and historical reflections have already begun. The approaching anniversary invites citizens to look back on the events of 1776 while also considering how the ideas expressed in the Declaration have shaped the nation over centuries. The milestone provides an opportunity to revisit the moment when independence was first declared and to reflect on the path that followed. Independence Day endures as a continuing connection between past and present. Each year, the celebrations of July 4th recall the decision made in Philadelphia and the document that carried that decision into history. Fireworks lighting the night sky, public gatherings, and the reading of the Declaration all serve as reminders of a moment when a group of colonies chose to define their own future. Through these traditions, the memory of independence continues to live within the civic life of the nation, linking the founding generation with those who remember it today. History often remembers its turning points through dates and documents, yet the meaning of those moments continues to evolve as generations reflect upon them. The Declaration of Independence, first written to explain a political decision, gradually became something larger than the circumstances that produced it. Over time, the document came to represent a shared reference point in the nation's story, a moment when a group of colonies chose to define their future in their own words. That decision did not resolve every question that would follow, nor did it conclude the challenges that lay ahead. Instead, it opened a long path of development, debate, and reflection that continues to shape the nation's character. Each generation encounters the Declaration within the context of its own time, reading the familiar lines with fresh perspective while still recognizing the historical moment from which they emerged. The celebrations that accompany Independence Day each year are therefore not only commemorations of the past but also acknowledgements that the ideas written in 1776 remain part of an ongoing conversation about governance, responsibility, and the meaning of independence. Each summer, as the 4th of July returns, communities across the United States pause to remember the Declaration that first announced the nation's independence. Fireworks illuminate the evening sky, flags appear along streets and homes, and gatherings bring families and neighbors together in shared celebration. These traditions have developed across centuries, linking modern observances with the earliest commemorations that followed the adoption of the Declaration. Though the circumstances of the present differ greatly from those of 1776, the anniversary continues to serve as a reminder of the moment when independence was first declared before the world. Through these recurring observances, the memory of that decision remains visible in public life. The light of each celebration reflects a continuity between past and present, carrying forward the recognition that the written declaration of a people's independence can echo through generations long after the original moment has passed. May the memory of this declaration remain not only as words written long ago, but as a reminder of the responsibility carried by those who choose their own course. The moment preserved in this record began with a small gathering of delegates who believed that the direction of their society should be decided by the people who lived within it. Their decision did not end history, nor did it resolve every challenge that would follow, but it set into motion a tradition that returns each summer with the light of celebration across the evening sky. As the years continue to unfold, may the remembrance of that beginning encourage reflection, gratitude, and a steady commitment to the principles that first gave voice to the idea of independence. Some records exist to preserve the continuity of a nation's founding declaration. This record maintains the trace of the moment when representatives of 13 colonies chose to announce their independence and explain their decision in written form. It preserves the mechanism by which a political declaration became a cultural tradition, remembered each year through gatherings, reflection, and celebration. The document adopted in Philadelphia during the summer of 1776 remains one of the enduring reference points in the historical narrative of the United States. By recording the events that surrounded its creation and the traditions that followed, this record affirms the preservation of a moment when the written word marked the beginning of the nation's self-declared course. Thank you for visiting our channel and spending time with our work. Red Cardinal Kitchen, the illumination of a dynamic archive.